In this video you'll see in detail how truck crankshafts are manufactured. The most incredible production and machining process is carried out by local workers in Pakistan. Using improvised tools, traditional techniques, and impressive courage, they face extreme risks to perform heavy-duty processes with surprising precision. Each movement reveals the artisanal skill that defies modern logic, showing how necessity and ingenuity come together in environments where technology is limited but talent is abundant. Prepare to see how the crankshaft, the heart of a heavy-duty diesel engine, is born from raw metal and transformed, step by step, into a shaft that withstands tons of alternating load, high combustion pressures, and long days on the road. The setting is not a polished industrial park. It's a dirt yard, a shed of rusted sheet metal, a furnace built with repurposed refractories, and a blowtorch that breathes according to the pressure the valve can deliver. The sound that guides the story isn't narration. It's the deep rumble of scrap metal falling into the hopper, the whistling of air entering the furnace, the flash of slag being scraped off, the sledgehammer marking the rhythm on the incandescent metal. This is how the birth of a crankshaft begins, a part that in any catalog would be synonymous with high engineering, but here appears surrounded by simplicity, sweat, and intuition. The journey begins with the iron that arrives in pieces, cut rails, old axles, thick plates, remnants of heavy parts. This mixture of different steels is sorted by a trained eye. The shine of the file, the color the metal takes on when heated, the spark that jumps when it touches the grinding wheel, everything serves as a language to guess composition, hardness, and temperability. There are no sophisticated spectrometers, there is memory. With the selection made, the pieces go to the furnace, where the wind, driven by a tired fan or a blower made of scrap metal, feeds the fire until the metal yields. The heat rises like a living animal, making night seem like day. When the mass becomes pasty, the breathtaking part begins. Removing it from the pot, the slow tilting, the gush that draws an orange river inside molds prepared on the ground, molds carved from damp sand, sometimes mixed with burnt oil to better withstand the temperature. The geometry of the crankshaft isn't born perfect. It's born rough, in a shape that respects the feeding channel, the gas outlet, and the masses that will later be sculpted. The mold is beaten, vibrated by hand to expel bubbles, and rests like a panting newborn while the temperature drops and the metal hardens. Everything here is about timing and listening, knowing when to open, when to demold, when to let it rest to avoid shrinkage cracks. Those who see it from the outside call it luck. Those who live from it call it work. When the crankshaft-shaped ingot leaves the mold, what emerges is a crude colossus, burrs, solidified feed channels, a dark, rough skin. First, the feed trees are cut with a blowtorch or improvised bandsaw. The smell of rust fills the air, and the weight of the future axle tells the arm holding the chain the kind of care it will need from then on. The raw material then undergoes controlled cooling, as controlled as the context allows. Without a computer-regulated relief furnace, the piece is covered with heated sand, ash, or repurposed ceramic fiber. The objective is simple and enormous: to let the steel rest, reduce internal stresses, and prevent cracks that would arise from thermal shock. Then begins the stage that separates the metal from its handler: forging and straightening. In larger workshops, an exhausted pile driver hammers the hot mass to bring fibers closer together, consolidate the shape, and align the main journal and connecting rod bearings. In smaller yards, heavy sledgehammers, anvils supported by blocks, and a choreography of men perform the work as a team, millimeter by millimeter. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner, wire and sheet metal templates emerge, cutouts that determine if the play between the journals will close, if the connecting rod bearing displacement is coherent, if the overall shape fits what the engine will require. It's a theater of precision without expensive instruments, where the trained eye and the reference mold command the symmetry. The part returns to the heat when resistance overcomes the arm. It returns to the anvil when the shine indicates the moment to work without cracking. Nothing is simple, nothing is quick, but each strike leaves the mark of a decision. Next comes the rough machining. The crankshaft is clamped in a lathe that has already lived other lives. Nozzles, jaws, and shims are adapted to hold a heavy and irregular body. First, the center is sought. The life of the crankshaft depends on an imaginary axis that needs to be respected. With the dial indicator absent, the operator uses contrast paint, chalk marks, and jumping under the tool to understand the off-center. The main journals receive a generous pass, just enough for a cylindrical surface to emerge beneath the casting crust. Then the eccentric masses, where the piston energy will be transformed, are sketched still in their rough state. Heavy filings fall to the ground in ribbons, and a fine, almost sweet smoke accompanies the cut. With each advance, the operator stops, listens, touches. It's a sensory method: sound, vibration, temperature. What would be on a graph becomes a conversation with the steel. If you're watching, hold your curiosity. In the next step, the shaft will tell you more clearly if it was born healthy. With the general shape defined, the lubrication holes arrive, the arteries through which the pressurized oil will feed the journals and connecting rods. Without a CNC drill, a robust column, sometimes built with a repurposed column and reinforced table, guides the advance. The points are marked with a punch and confirmed with a metal jig. The angle of the hole is critical. It needs to reach the central gallery and open to the connecting rod journal at the right point, ensuring that the oil jet arrives during the angle of greatest load. Here, any mistake leads to premature wear. Drilling is done slowly, the drill bit is removed to clean chips, air is used to blow, and the continuity of the channel is checked with a metal rod. Then, the recessing and chamfering of the entrances begins, so that the oil does not encounter sharp edges. The interior is then roughened with a flexible steel brush, expelling residues that could circulate through the engine like liquid sandpaper. Subsequently, the surfaces of the main and connecting rod journals go from coarse machining to finishing machining. The lathe gives way to a grinding system, and when precision grinding is not available, an abrasive stone arrangement with controlled feed is set up by hand, literally. The goal is to reduce roughness and ensure a healthy oil film. The goal is a mirror, but the path is one of short steps. Pass the stone, stop, measure, touch, warm it up a little, wait, go back. At each pause, the operator marks with chalk the areas that still don't communicate with the stone. The touch of the finger, with the shaft stationary, picks up microundulations that the eye ignores. The center line is pursued as if it were a stubborn star in a cloudy sky. Align, rotate, check. With the finishing touches approaching, the question of balancing arises. The crankshaft is a maestro of forces that try to destroy it. In workshops with more resources, there is a balancing shaft with sensors. Here there is a stand, belts, pulleys, and lead. The crankshaft is clamped by the main journals and allowed to rotate freely. The points that insist on descending indicate excess mass. Drilling is done to lighten the load, material is removed from the counterweights. Sometimes weight is added on the opposite side with pins or welding when the context calls for it. It's a work of patience that transforms vibration into harmony. For the viewer, this is the time to stay until the end. The axis that swings like a pendulum begins to stop where you want it to stop. And that changes everything when the motor starts. While the shape and balance take shape, other smaller, yet essential, tasks run in parallel. Radii of curvature are smoothed to avoid stress concentrations. Invisible burrs are hunted down with a hand stone. Oil channels receive repeated cleanings until they run clean. Plugs are manufactured to seal secondary galleries. If there is access to a stress relief furnace, the crankshaft returns to moderate heat for a stress relief. Enough heat to reorganize stresses, but not enough to ruin what has already been machined. Without a furnace, it is covered with blanket and hot sand. The objective is the same as far as possible. There is also homemade surface treatment. In some places, controlled oxidation is applied, a handcrafted honing that helps the oil film to lie down better. When a real grinding machine appears, it reigns supreme for a few minutes. The shaft is placed, the eccentricity is adjusted, the stone is allowed to sing its song, and the surface responds with a shine that inspires pride. Once the geometry is complete, the ritual of measurement begins, at the very limit of the context. Old micrometers, sometimes with play, are zeroed against improvised standards. Clocks with worn hands are read with care. Where there are no tools, there is paint and touch. The piece is painted, temporarily mounted on bearings and slowly rotated. Where the paint disappears first reveals where it adheres most strongly. It's a poor reading on paper but rich in experience. The result is evaluated as on any factory floor. It works or it's returned. When it's returned, nobody complains, they just start again. Between one pass and another, the crankshaft finds the workbench where small secrets are born. Adjusted keyway notches, surfaces where the retainer will work polished beyond what is necessary, rounded edges where the assembler's sleeve could tear. The shaft, which was once an incandescent block, an amorphous mass, a rough, crude piece of machinery, now looks like what it should have been from the beginning. A steel spine full of joints ready to transform alternating motion into smooth rotation. For those seeking SEO and CTR, describe what the eye sees. Truck crankshaft, handcrafted in Pakistan, forging and casting, heavy machining, journal grinding, lubrication holes, manual balancing, popular engineering, documentary without narration. Words that find an audience because they translate the astonishment of what is witnessed. Stay until the end, the real test comes now. Assembling the crankshaft in the engine is more than a technical step. It is the final proof that everything went right. Every detail matters because any mistake here can condemn hours of work. Bearing caps receive jeweler-like attention. First, meticulous cleaning of the channels, removal of invisible residues, inspection of the thrust washers that hold the shaft in place. Nothing can escape. When there is no assembly grease, heavy, thick, almost artisanal oil is used to ensure that the first turn is not dry. The bushings need to fit perfectly, like two pieces that were born to meet. Before any tightening, the ritual is always the same. Turning the shaft by hand, asking it to speak. If it slides like cold butter, the path is open. If it scratches, if it sticks, the ear reveals the point. It is a silent dialogue between metal and experience. The tightening is not rough. It is gradual, crosswise, respecting the order that avoids deformations. Each step requires a new rotation because the shaft needs to rotate freely before moving on to the next torque. In environments without measuring instruments, subtlety wins the game. The arm that tightens also feels when the part asks for calm. It is a knowledge that is not in the manual, but in the muscle memory of someone who has done this 1,000 times. In front, the pulley, behind, the steering wheel. The auxiliary masses join the axle to make up the assembly that will face combustion. While everything aligns, someone checks with a syringe or a hand pump if the oil is escaping from the right points. Seeing the trickle appear on the connecting rod journals is like watching a heartbeat for the first time. It is a sign of life, of circulation, that the lubrication is ready to protect each turn. When the engine shuts down, the atmosphere changes. It's as if everyone is holding their breath. The initial idle is a collective prayer. The sound starts irregularly, then finds rhythm. The vibration is there, but moderate. The exhaust smoke loses density. The temperature rises where it should and behaves where it needs to. It is here that a ground-level crankshaft shows that it belongs on the road. There is no dynamometer, no sophisticated test bench. There is hearing, sight, and touch. The truck takes its first turn, still timid, with the driver hearing what only he understands. Each noise is a word, each silence is a sentence. If the dashboard doesn't complain, if the ear approves, if the smell of oil doesn't betray burning, the mission is accomplished. What the camera captures is a vehicle moving with dignity. What it doesn't capture is the silent pride of someone who, with little, accomplished much. This moment is more than mechanics, it's survival. Because before the crankshaft reaches the block, there's a process that begins in the makeshift foundry, where scraps of old metal become raw material. Bars are heated until they're red as glowing embers, hammered until they take shape, tempered in dark oil that hisses like a snake. Then comes the manual machining. Files, emery wheels, measurements by touch, adjustments by ear. There's no CNC, no laser. There's repetition, patience, and courage. Each crankshaft journal is polished until it shines. Each oil channel is carefully opened so as not to fail in its mission to lubricate. The balancing is artisanal. Weights are added or removed with perforations calculated by eye, seeking a balance that won't betray the engine on the road. It's a job that mixes science and instinct, done under pressure with minimal resources, but with a clear objective: to restore movement to what has stopped. When all this comes together, the scene that captivates the viewer until the very last second is born. Because it's not just about assembling parts. It's about challenging modern logic with pure ingenuity. It's about men who, without access to technology, create solutions that work. It's about risk, sweat, and practical intelligence. And here's an invitation. Stay until the very last seconds because the final shot shows the speedometer stabilizing while the landscape rolls by. It's visual proof that the new axle sings with the road. For the algorithm, it's worth reinforcing in the text. Handmade crankshaft, complete process. Casting and machining in Pakistan, handmade balancing, silent documentary, popular engineering, heavy truck parts. These are words that the audience searches for and that describe exactly what they see, increasing clicks and viewing time. Sometimes the video ends and the story continues. Here we prefer that the video continues while the story ends. Because the manufacture of a crankshaft in a limited context is not just about metal. It's about people, about an economy that needs to keep turning, about learning that isn't in manuals, but in scars and gestures. Each piece that is born carries invisible marks of human effort, sweat, and risk. The environment is harsh, and safety often falls short of what is needed, which is why this account is observational and not an invitation to reproduce. What we see is a miracle manufactured in the encounter between fire, hammer, and patience. With each finished piece, the invisible map of the country is reorganized. A truck that was stopped returns to carrying food, medicine, raw materials. A driver who was sleeping on the roadside resumes his journey. A workshop that seemed made of scraps reveals a laboratory of invention. Imagine the scene. A dusty shed, walls improvised with iron sheets, a dirt floor mixed with burnt oil. There are no CNC machines, no robots, no digital control. There are men who know metal by sound, by smell, by color. When the crankshaft arrives, deformed or worn, a sequence that seems impossible begins. First, the heating. Blowtorches fed by cylinders without perfect adjustment, flames that oscillate like panting breath. Heat pervades everything, and the metal responds with tones that only trained eyes can decipher. Then the shaping, hammer blows that are not random but calculated by instinct, by the history of 1,000 previous repairs. Each blow is a conversation with the piece, each spark is a comma in this wordless language. Meanwhile, the workshop pulsates with metallic sounds, welding hisses, dry crackles. The welding is done with worn electrodes, irregular beads that look like scars, but that withstand colossal forces. There is no adequate mask, no reinforced gloves. There are calloused hands that hold the electric arc as if holding destiny. The intense light burns the retina, but they continue because stopping is not an option. The crankshaft begins to take shape, layer by layer, until it looks whole again. It is a raw rebirth without aesthetics but with functionality. And when the piece cools, the work does not end. Comes the manual machining phase, done with files, emery wheels, and improvised jigs. Millimetric adjustments are felt by touch, not measured by instruments. It's pure folk engineering. Every detail matters. A mistake can mean future breakdown, accident, loss of cargo. Therefore, despite the rush, there is rigor. A rigor that is not in written rules but in ingrained habits. The mechanic rotates the part, listens to the sound, feels the vibration, checks the shine of the surface. When everything seems right, the crankshaft is presented to the assembly, and the assembly becomes a ritual. Bolts tightened with force measured by the body, lubrication done with thick grease, tests that depend on the ear more than the eye. The engine starts turning again, and the sound is music to the ears of those who have spent hours under heat, smoke, and risk. It is at this moment that the story reaches its climax. The impossible has become possible, and the road recovers a truck that carries not only cargo but hope. For content creators, this is the moment to thank those who watched until the end, ask them to comment on where they are watching from, to share with someone who loves hardcore mechanics, to subscribe so they don't miss the next chapter. The day the camera enters the clandestine forges where connecting rods, pulleys, bushings, and flywheels made from melted scrap metal sprout. Simple, direct, and honest words move the audience. Watch until the end. You won't believe the final test. The sound of the engine says it all. Raw, popular engineering. If you've made it this far, you already understand. In Pakistan, the impossible doesn't get another name. It takes shape. And the crankshaft, which seemed like a distant dream of a high-tech factory, leaves a dusty shed to spin under the hood of a truck that crosses valleys and deserts. When the sun sets, the workshop cools like newly formed metal. On the floor, there are metal shavings that resemble a shower of silver. On our hands, calluses remain, telling a story we almost never hear. And on the screen, the images you just saw remain. From fire to rotation, from the raw to the precise, from improvisation to the finished work. If this video touched you, leave a comment, hit the like button, share it with a friend, and stay with us. Every week, a new episode of the engineering the world doesn't see, but that keeps the whole world moving.